Hello and welcome to the Dark Bestiary, Chapter 4, The Screaming Antelope. My name's Fen, and in this series we take a look at all of the hunt and showdown related aspects of the various different monsters in Kingdom Death. This time it's the Screaming Antelope, but before we get onto that, I think it's worth talking a little bit about Quarry Node 2, which is what the Screaming Antelope belongs to. I'm going to refer to it as Node 2 for the rest of this. There is actually Quarry Node 2 and Nemesis Node 2. Bit of a mouthful, they're quite different on mechanical and power level considerations, but when I say Node 2 in this video, I mean Quarry Node 2. So, Node 2 is obviously the second node, and Node 1 being the White Lion, the Gorm, the Frog Dog, and the Crimson Crocodile, and Node 2 being the Screaming Antelope, the Spidicules, the Smog Singers, and the Flower Knight. Now, if you're not familiar with nodes, it's part of the campaigns and pillars and node system that was introduced in the Gambler's Chest. It's kind of a formalization of the way we were all building campaigns anyway, giving us sort of an official guide. It's pretty simple in the book. Highlights through how you build it, and essentially to build this official campaign you pick one monster each quarry node and one monster each nemesis node and a core monster and a finale monster, and that's how you build your custom campaign. It's a very solid system. It's so good in fact that I really wish we would get a living document version on the Kingdom Death website, so we can just reference to that as and when new monsters are added. But regardless, it's really good, it's very simple, and even if you don't have the Gambler's Chest, the core of the system is fairly straightforward to understand. You're meant to pick one monster each node, and monsters in a node are roughly the same kind of power. So the concept of Node 2s is essentially they're the monsters that fit in between Node 1 and Node 3 per doi. Pretty obvious, but it kind of does matter because what it means is all these monsters have to be introduced after the Node 1 monsters, who currently all turn up in Node 1 or in the prologue, and the Node 3 monsters turning up, which is like Lantern Year 7. For the most part, this means they appear in Lantern Year 2. The Flower Knight is an exception to that, it turns up a little bit later. One of the odd quirks about Node 2 is it's very inconsistent in its power level. You'd expect if a monster's turned up in Lantern Year 2 that it would be very similar to the ones that turn up in Lantern Year 1. And often, on the surface, they do have a lot of similarities. They have roughly the same kind of toughness levels within a couple of points of each other, roughly the same wound levels, that kind of stuff. But when you look at each individual monster, there's a lot of inconsistency. So when I talk about Node 1, I can look at the White Lion and go, this is the weakest Node 1 monster, which doesn't mean it's bad. It's designed to introduce players to the game. It does that perfectly. It's a fantastic showdown and hunt. It's really well put together. But then we get to like the Gorm, and it's a little bit tougher, but not astronomically so. Frog Dog, very similar to the White Lion as well. I think they're kind of comparable on power level. It's a bit more complex though, so it explains why it's an expansion. And then you have the Crimson Crocodile, which I do think is the most difficult and challenging of the Node 1 monsters. When we get to Node 2, the honest truth is the Screaming Antelope, the Smog Singers, and the Flower Knight are all easier to handle than the Node 1 monsters. The only exception is Spidicules, which is going to be the next video, and I'm very excited about that because it's one of the best showdowns in the game. It's really well done. It's great fun. But on the whole, they kind of soften the game a bit. So the question would be, why? Why would you have them? So why would you include the Screaming Antelope in your campaign? Well, it turns out this monster, this little goat here, this antelope, plays a very important part within the introductory kind of experience. You see, it always comes with these 6 pieces of acanthus, and the White Lion and the Screaming Antelope both turn up before the Butcher, and they're there to help you prepare for the Butcher. They are designed pretty much to get you to the point that you can fight the butcher and beat it. This acanthus is a big part of that, because you can usually scoop up 1 or 2 pieces of dried acanthus when hunting the screaming antelope, and that gives you the ability to not only gain survival when departing, but ignore a severe injury, which is always a nice sort of safety net, but you don't want to get there a lot of the time, because that means you've already lost all of your armor and you're in a bad state if you're starting to take severe injuries. The exception is the butcher has 2 AI cards called Bite, and Bite, if it hits, goes straight to severe head injuries, and severe head injuries are terrifying. So having this, a couple of these, maybe even 4 when you go in against the butcher, is really, really useful when you're sort of learning the game, because having a butcher decide to bite on the first turn, go straight up to your tank and chew their head off, that's the loss of like your best unit potentially, because they were meant to soak up all the hits and provide that wall to wear the butcher down against. But if the butcher just, eats them straight away, well, that's terrifying. That's really bad. So this is one of the biggest benefits of the Screaming Antelope. On top of that, though, it has a lot of interesting items. It provides a lot of bones, so it's good support for weapons. The armor set, while a little undercooked at the moment, I think the armor points are 5 points too low, 3 to 5 points too low. It's still a very good armor set if you're not front-lining with it, if you're playing a little sort of support-ish, and it has great spear synergies. And also, with the introduction of the Indomitable Survivor Zell, we've now got a really good spear you can get from the level 3. So there's a lot to like about the Screaming Antelope on that particular front. So that's our Node 2 spiel. That's a little talk about mechanically why you want the Screaming Antelope in it. So now let's get on to the lore. So here we are with the Showdown. There's actually not a massive amount of additional lore in the Screaming Antelopes, with the exception of little snippets here and there that we'll see when we go through the Showdown cards and the various hunt cards and bits and pieces, and we'll have a brief look at the legendary monsters as well. So a big part of our background kind of impressions we get comes from things like this picture here, which doesn't actually look too much like the physical miniature. I have seen some people who have painted the miniature to look like this artwork, or have gone a bit further and even resculpted the antelope to match it. I think it looks stunning. The actual sculpt we have looks a bit more like the Crush and Devour art, but we can see a little bit about this. It's very kind of standard antelope for the most part. We have here a classic horns, a very sort of almost emaciated shape to it. They are constantly hungry. They're constantly eating. They mostly prefer to eat herbivorously, but it seems they're very capable, like everything in Kingdom Death, of feeding on meat, because you take advantage of whatever food sources you can get when you can. Primarily they seem to graze with their mouth on the head, but the large undermouth is definitely used for like larger things, and we'll even see some kind of situations where they dig into the stone faces in order to get sustenance that way from whatever maybe is trapped in the cracks or little bits and pieces. They definitely really love acanthus, and they have an incredibly hyperactive metabolism, because acanthus really heals them a lot. Like acanthus within Kingdom Death has this general property of being a almost magical healing herb. It's used as a healing herb in our world, but what it does with antelopes is even more than that. It's worth noting that these animals are ungulates. That's how they walk, so they perambulate around on their hooves, so like horses, giraffes, zebras, etc. Moose, so very different from Dogs and lions are digitigrades, who walk on their toes as opposed to their hooves, nails, and plantigrades like ourselves, who walk on the full sort of toes for metacastles, flat kind of thing. That does play a little bit into their sort of the way that they move around, and I wanted to talk briefly about it because I think it's interesting how that's expressed in the monster's behaviour. When it comes to a little piece of lore here, to be brutally honest, this isn't so much about the Screaming Antelope as it is just world building. It reads, there once was a fearsome monster that was trained by the hand to be a steed for the goblin. However, upon smelling its new master, the monster's mind shattered and it ran into the unknown, foaming at the mouth and biting the noses off the stone-faced floor. So, these are always kind of unreliable narrator sort of things. We definitely know the hand absolutely exists. The goblin is a bit more of a question mark. Probably does. We know there's a false goblin out there that's pretending to be the goblin, and probably the real goblin's not too pleased about that if he does find out. I would assume that the goblin is the real thing, but we'll see. Ultimately, it doesn't matter for the Screaming Antelope. This is mostly a reference to the Mad Steed, which is the legendary monster, so I'm going to flip to that page now, so we can just have a brief look at the legendary Screaming Antelope. Okay, here we are, the Mad Steed. You can say, they say the hand once trained a great horned beast to be ridden by him alone. As the beast carried the hand from one terrible task to the next, its appetite grew and its horns took on twisted shapes. So this one might be the one that also ran away when gifted to the goblin. It might be a different one, we don't know, but what's interesting here is that it seems like at least entities on the level of the hand can train these and ride these around, which is pretty cool. Survivors don't seem to consider doing that, but we don't see a lot of domestication, and generally it seems like when survivors try and domesticate animals, things don't turn out too well for them for the most part, although they seem to be very good at looking after bugs. So we have one more little section of lore to look at as well, which is the introductory event, Endless Screams. So I'll flip to that and then we'll just go through it. Alright, so here we are, Endless Screams. The image is a bit of kind of more metaphorical than what actually happens. So it's kind of interesting to see. More of what the survivors imagine these screams to be rather than what they actually are. So, a scream pierces the silence around the settlement. As the noise fades, a chorus of horror rises up in answer, and the settlement erupts into chaos trying to comprehend the source of the terrible wail. We can now hunt the Screaming Antelope, and we nominate a survivor to gain 1 courage and become the voice of reason. Generally, pick somebody you don't really care too much about. This is early in the campaign, Lantern Year 2, so you should have plenty of blank slate survivors. So if you pick just a pleb, a ordinary survivor, that's a good place to start, because on a 1 or a 2, this survivor will lose the courage they just gained and suffer the shattered jaw of severe head injury, so they can't encourage, they can't consume. That's not one of the worst severe injuries, but it definitely is something you want to not really have when you're starting your career hunting. It's more like if you get a shattered jaw along the way, it happens. On a 3, 4, 5 or a 6, 40% of the time, the survivor realises the noise is likely another strange creature that lives out in the darkness. After some effort, they manage to calm the settlement. That survivor, so the one we've picked, gains +1 understanding, and all returning survivors gain +1 insanity. That's nice at this stage. You've now got a survivor with +1 understanding and +1 courage, so they are 1/3 of the way towards their bold and insight unlocks. Fantastic. And +1 insanity on returning survivors is nice to have as well. We do want a little bit of insanity buffer wherever possible. As long as we don't send out all our survivors insane on a hunt, unless you have survivor of the fittest, feat, boom, boom. On a 7, 8, 9, 10, the survivor stands firm in Screaming Unknown. Slow and strong words charge the seventh sphere into tingling excitement. After all, the endless screams might be an opportunity to gain knowledge and harness the darkness. The survivor gains the Orator of Death fighting art, and the returning survivors get +2 insanity. So, Orator of Death is once per showdown you can activate, and you will give all of the other survivors additional insanity, and if you die, you encourage all other survivors. It's okay, it doesn't blow me away, but it's also worth noting that there are sometimes encouragement and other sort of benefits, like synergies, as weird as it is to having encouraged benefits on a survivor when they die, but, it's fine. Right, that's the thing. If you roll a 3 to 10 on this, then you get a survivor you can take out on hunts occasionally, and they're a little bit more useful than the average survivor. So that's why I recommend chucking a pleb into this, because you don't mind. If you roll the 20% and they get a shattered jaw, then heck, they can have babies until they've used their lifetime reroll, and then you can use them as, however appropriate. Maybe something unfortunate will happen to them, population gets lost, Some survivors ultimately become disposable, they're all resources. So, that's pretty much it on the lore stuff. As I said, there's not that much, but I think that's really fine, because some creatures just exist in the world. They don't all need to have a big giant mystery behind them, and I think that's great. We have the white lions, who are really linked in so heavily to everything in the history of the world, or implied in the history of the world, and then we have the Gorms, who seem to suggest that they were once survivors who changed, becoming obsessed with eating, question mark, that's a speculation on my part. So it's nice to just have an animal that exists, and especially one like the Screaming Antelope that is really prey level. This is not a monster that ever gives the impression that it's out hunting anything. It can be dangerous. As it gets older, it certainly does become dangerous, and the Screaming God, which is the Node 4 version of this monster, is very, very dangerous, having been changed by parasites. But that's for the future. I don't have any more of an insight in what the Screaming God's going to be like than any of you do. I've just read the same public stuff, and I look forward to it. I'm very excited to it, but I imagine we'll come back to Screaming Antelopes when we finally get the Screaming God. Main things we know is they grow continuously. Their horns definitely become bigger and longer, and I wish my chair would stop clicking, but I can't afford a new one. And beyond that, we know they're herd animals. They're very similar in some ways to other our own antelopes. I imagine they're based on an American antelope of some kind as the original inspiration. They're definitely predated upon by white lions. We see that right here in the Dead Antelope card. They're predated upon by Spidicules. Not only do antelopes refuse to be in the area that Spidicules is in, because they either get eaten to extinction or they just run away, but also we know Spidicules eats antelopes, because literally we can have a Spidicules belch up a Screaming Antelope bladder, which can, clearly indicates it. So that's the main part there. On to our hunt phase. So I'm going to reopen so we can take a look at the layout of the hunt and where the cards are positioned. Okay, so as we can see, you actually get 2 hunt events with the level 1 Screaming Antelope. That's not always going to be the case, but it does mean that the hunt against Screaming Antelope is more predictable than against a monster which only has one of its own specific events. We can also see very significantly this. So this space, just after Overwhelming Darkness, gives us a spot where we can put mineral gathering and other things and get the benefit of post-Overwhelming Darkness. There's a number of monsters who sit exactly on this space. Level 2 Antelope being here is one of the earliest places where we can get access to this, so it's always worth remembering if you're looking to get mineral gathering going and you want to explore the tunnels. a level 2 Screaming Antelope is a great place to start doing it. The level 2 Screaming Antelope is also kind of in many ways a better target than the level 2 White Lion if you're looking to step up in your difficulty and you're not completely confident. We will talk about that when we get to the specific level 2 traits and everything, but I do find normally I can hunt the level 2 Screaming Antelope with less power behind my survivors than I need for the level 2 White Lion, so that's kind of useful as well. It's still way tougher than the Smog Singers. The Smog Singers are just punching bags by design. Other thing to note, as we'll see, is the level 3 Screaming Antelope can run off over and get to the back where the starvation space is. So sometimes worth bearing in mind that could happen and preparing for it wherever possible, with cooking and similar. So just be aware of that starvation is more likely with Screaming Antelope than many other monsters. And also at every level it's very, very mobile. It can quite often run backwards over Overwhelming Darkness even at level 1, and that can hurt. That can hurt quite a lot. Onto the hunt events. I've organised them as I try to do, with most beneficial on the top, harmful on the bottom. Left here is kind of fixed, you know what you're getting, and right here is random. If we just take a really quick look, we can see when it comes to beneficial, we've got 4 at the top here. This I consider to be neutral, and then for harmful we've got 4 on the bottom here. So we'll start with the harmful ones. This is Migration, Skittish and Carpet Ticks. Migration's very simple. This is when the antelope moves 3 spaces away. That makes your hunt longer. That means it can run past Overwhelming Darkness. That means it can hit starvation. These are all things you want to be thinking about before you go on the hunt. There's not a lot you can do about it, but it hurts. Then we've got Skittish, the antelope moving back one. This more often isn't quite so much of a deal, but combined with migration it can be pretty bad. And then we get a random hunt event on top of that, so effectively Skittish is giving you not 1 but 2 extra random hunt events, because it's giving you 1 here on the card and then it's moving back 1 and giving you another. So this is one of those ways that the hunt phase can suddenly catch you off guard. And last of all, we've got Carpet of Ticks. This is everyone gets assaulted by a huge writhing ticks in a carpet form. Roll 1d10 out of your hunt. Experience the result on a 6+. You smash the ticks away in a shower of gore. Otherwise, you get sick. Your survival drops to 0, and on an 8+, that's 8, 9, 10, 30%, you suffer -1 permanent strength. Carpet of Ticks becomes less and less of a concern when your levels climb up. It can feel pretty bad if you're lower in levels, so it's harder, but it's still 50%. It can also feel really bad if your survival hits 0 and then you head into Overwhelming Darkness with no survival. Again, you don't have too much control over this, but sometimes you may have things like the Manhunter's Reverberating Lantern that can replenish your survival. Think about it. If you drop to 0 survival before Overwhelming Darkness, you always want to consider those things. On our random side over here, we just have Stampede, so I can just hit that here. A thunderous boom approaches. The survivors may hide. If they do, move the quarry space 1 back. Otherwise, all survivors gain +1 courage, and we roll. On a 1, everyone suffers 2 event damage to each lit location. That's 40 points of damage. That's a lot. On a 2 to 7, 2 brain event damage. That's fine. That's fine. And then 8, 9, and 10, you get to start the showdown immediately. Also pretty fine. The key thing here, I tend to class this as negative because I generally just let the antelope move back 1 unless I've got rerolls available, because I've been hit by that trampled, and trampled, just like Acid Rain or is it Acid Storm, Acid Rain, the hunt event, and the Lightning Strike, can utterly wreck you before you get to the showdown, and I just prefer to classify this as harmful so I don't deal with it. Obviously, if you have otherworldly luck, in which case you're playing with 2 node 2 monsters, so you're kind of house ruling, but that's fine. This is okay. If you have any way of avoiding that one result, this is absolutely fine, and you could put it into the positive because it's giving you courage. Ultimately, it's just down to how comfortable you feel. Then we have our neutrals. So I just have the one. It's Vomit Pile. I think this is pretty much. It's a gamble. You get to scavenge, you get +1 courage for all survivors, that's nice, but on a 1 to 4 you have to archive all consumable gear, and you can't opt out of rolling to this, and it's worth noting that there's some really good consumable gear out there. Raiment, monster grease, things like that. So if you don't have any consumable gear, this is amazing. You're just always going to roll on it if you have nothing to lose. But if you do have consumable gear, think about how valuable it is and how important it is for the showdown coming. 5 to 8 +1 survival, that's nice, fine. 9 or 10, we get +1 understanding and a random Screaming Antelope resource, that's amazing. If no one scavenges, it just becomes a random hunt event. So a lot of the time for me, once I'm set up, this is a random hunt event, because unless I'm not relying on consumable gear, I really don't want to take a 40% chance per survivor to lose all of that. Then we have on our positives, our fixed side, we've got Devoured Grounds. The stone face ground is littered with the leavings of ravenous passing beasts, half-eaten acanthus plants are strewn everywhere. If any survivors 3+ understanding, you may skip the next hunt space, otherwise roll for a random hunt event. So either a random hunt event, so it's effectively just a blank normal space, or later on, 3+ understanding, you get to skip ahead. Fantastic. Really happy with that. Grazing field. The acanthus leaves sprout from the crevices in the stone ground. Survivors spend time gathering and eating the small leaves. Each survivor may heal one hit location of their choice, restoring all injury levels and armor points. Obviously, very situational. Never can be sure whether that's going to be helpful or not. If you are healing stuff, I don't know if you got stampeded, remember that the body and the head are priorities over the other locations wherever possible. Body because it hit twice as often, head because it's way more lethal and has less natural soak. If any survivor has a sickle, they gain 1 fresh acanthus strange resource. Always happy to have that, that's more healing. And roll a random hunt event always, which, that's kind of often I expect that. Then we have Dead Antelope. So I've kind of put this in the middle between random and not, because this one's a gamble. It is definitely positive, but you could feel like it's seriously negative. So the survivors are struck by the scent of rotting meat wafting from a hulking corpse ahead. The event revealer may lead the survivors to investigate. If they do, you gain 1 random vermin resource, 2 random Screaming Antelope resources, and you have to roll a d10. On a result of 7+, the survivors are startled by the arrival of the antelope's killer, a white lion. We have to end the hunt immediately. We start a showdown with the white lion 1 level higher than the quarry, or the highest level available using its setup rules, and add a dent monster terrain card to the showdown. If you don't investigate, random hunt event. So most of the time, against level 1s and level 2s, you are going to roll the random hunt event here. This isn't like the White Lion Cub. The punishment here can just basically result in you losing all the resources you'd have got. Fighting a monster that's a level higher than you expected when you're not prepared for it is way harder than you'd actually think it is. So be cautious. However, if you're hunting a level 3 Screaming Antelope and you don't care if it happens to be a white lion instead, always roll on this, because it's capped. It's going to be the highest level available. If you can handle a level 3 white lion, and you should be able to if you can handle a level 3 Screaming Antelope, suddenly this becomes an option to start gathering from, and that's a nice area to sort of consider. I like how this card changes as you go further on into the campaign and get towards the higher level stuff, where suddenly it's like, no, we can do this now. This is fine. Last of all, we've got our positive cards. Let's just double check. I think positive randoms. Yeah, it's just the 1 card. This is Teething. Survivors find a trail of large rotting teeth litter in the ground. Each survivor may scavenge. You roll 1d10. On a 1 to 3, you suffer 1 event damage to the arm's location from sharp shards. On a 4 to 8, you find nothing. On a 9 or 10, you find an intact tooth, which is 1 large flat tooth Screaming Antelope resource. If no one scavenges, you roll a random hunt events. A 30% chance of taking 1 event damage to the arms is worth a 20% chance of getting a large flat tooth. So just always do this. Even if every survivor takes the event damage to the arms, I think it was still worth the attempt. So this is an event that I just think you should always go for. If it wasn't event damage, if it could actually cause severe injuries, we might have a bit more of a think about it. Anyway, that is our hunt phase. So next up, we have the showdown. We'll take a little look at the showdown setup here. We'll go through all of this when we get to the dashboard, but the setup is unusual. This is a little different to many of the monsters because we're actually setting up on one of the or either of the short edges. So we can go along either short edge. I recommend you always pick the same short edge. It is very, very rare that you would not do that at all. And I'm not entirely clear on the wording as to whether they all collectively have to be on the same edge or not. I've never really bothered thinking about it because I always want them on the same edge. And I'll always start on the left-hand side because that's just my preference. But I think actually the right-hand side is slightly better because the bug patch is one nearer. So if you're going to be optimal as opposed to, for some reason, I always pick the left side, the right side's ever so slightly better. The acanthus plants is worth noting because they have special showdown setup rules. They ignore their normal rules, so you can set them all up, and I would generally put them all into these spaces here because the antelope is quite often going to be slightly out of range on its first turn and it's going to eat some acanthus. So if you want to get some, you desperately want to get in and grab, at least you want these two to have a go at it if you need that dried acanthus. There is another use for that. We're going to talk about farming the antelope for resources a little bit further on when we get to the chow down card. But for now, if you're just planning to play honestly and grab this stuff, then I absolutely recommend you put them all within this area. Maybe you could put one down here for somebody going to the bug patch, but you generally don't need to put them on the opposite side away from you or anywhere you're not planning to be. Worth noting, the antelope does move around a lot, so the other advantage of the acanthus plants being collected and clumped together is it gives the place where the antelope's more likely to be drawn back to try and graze on them. We get one bug patch, which is nice. That's a potential extra resource, and we get 2 random extra terrain cards, which is really nice as well. This is a great way of trying to get more unusual pieces of terrain for whatever reason you need them for. This is very helpful for that. There you go. Finding a early survivor corpse or debris pile or something like that, especially I think the debris pile with its ability to pop out a scrap sword can be transformative for your campaign. On the rewards, we can see these are very standard victory rewards. The defeat reward is, some survivor who's not particularly useful becomes death, so they become another disposable unit. And then obviously beating it, we get Stone Circle. This next line is very important to note. 20 plus insanity, you will lose that survivor. They will run off into the darkness, or driven mad by a screaming death wail, as it says there. Yeah, so this isn't a fight for your 100 insanity immortal survivors or anything like that. Be very careful. I generally wouldn't take a survivor into this showdown who's got more than 10 insanity baseline unless I have ways of burning through it. On the reward front, we can see this is very standard: 4 and 4, 4 and 6, 5, 7 and 1 black lichen. Also there's this extra bonus with pottery. This is really good. If you have pottery, you absolutely want to defeat at least one level 3 Screaming Antelope, because the astute ability is, on arrival if possible, you add an acanthus plant terrain card to the showdown. Extra acanthus plants is amazing. Suddenly you have a survivor who not only can generate extra resources that can be converted into dried acanthus, but if you don't need the dried acanthus, they can use this stuff during the showdown to act like a medic. Very rarely do you get healing in Kingdom Death. This is an ability that gives you that, and I greatly rate it. Right, that is all of that, so let's go and take a look at the dashboard. So we'll start over here with the reference side of the basic action card. So we can see level 1 has 11 wounds, a 7-3 split, a few more advanced than some of the other monsters. I believe, if I remember correctly, the white line's 8-2. Or is it the Gorm? Anyway, 7-3 means it's a little bit less predictable. Those advanced actions can be providing a fair amount. 6 movement here, very standard. 8 toughness, again, very standard. And it has trample, which we'll look at in a moment. But it leverages this mechanic to try and deal additional damage that can't be dodged or blocked. At level 2, it goes up to 16 wounds with 10 basic and 5 advanced. Its movement goes up by 2, its toughness goes up by 2, and it gains the standard +1 speed and +1 damage. Quick little side note, sometimes when you see me play, you'll see me put tokens onto the board to represent these. They're not tokens. I use it as a visual reminder to myself because Kingdom Death is a complicated game, especially when playing on the simulator. It can be easy for me to lose track, so I just put them on here. When it comes to actually playing physically, I have unique tokens that help me track these permanent extra stat increases that are flat fixed to the monster. I just thought I'd mention that because I don't think I've talked about it previously, but because a lot of the time I have the card this way down, I actually have references that let me see what movement and toughness and speed and damage is I keep on the dashboard. So I do a little bit like that with the simulator, but key thing is that if you ever see me with tokens in the simulator on the board, they're not actually mechanically tokens, they're reminders for me because I do forget a lot of things when playing on the simulator, because while it has these great like zoom ins and outs and everything, it doesn't have a wide enough field of view for me, and I can't flick my head from left to right quickly, so I miss things. It is what it is. Against Diabolical on top of Trample, we're going to talk a bit about Diabolical. It is definitely a little counterintuitive in how it works. Mechanically it is sound, but historically people do get a little bit confused in how it works because you'd think it would work a different way. That'll make more sense when I talk about it. Level 3 is a huge jump up. That is 23 wounds from 16, 12 basic, 8 advanced and 2 legendary. Plus it has legendary horns in play already, which is another one of its legendary cards. Its movement stays at 8, its toughness only climbs to 12. Speed and damage both jump up an additional 1 to +2 each. It then has legendary horns, which I think technically should just be a status card these days, but it's an L card still. Diabolical, hypermetabolism, trample, and the classic indomitable. It also gets +1 evasion token. That's actually a token. Last of all, we have this instinct. This is the monster full moves to the closest acanthus plant and ends its turn. If the monster is on or adjacent to the acanthus plant, you archive it and it heals 1 wound, but if there are no acanthus plants on the showdown board, it will instead move forward in a straight line. So this creates the greyhound track, the ring, where essentially once you've got the antelope down to its basic action, which we'll see in a moment, it triggers graze a lot, and if there's no acanthus, it just runs to the edge of the board and runs round and round in circles. You will eventually manage to kill it because it's not doing anything else, but it can sometimes take a little while. Our basic action is a standard 2 speed, 2+ accuracy, 1 damage, move and attack target, but the key thing here is it will only pick the closest knockdown survivor in range. It doesn't pick otherwise, it goes straight to graze. So this makes the antelope's basic action very soft. if you've cleared all the acanthus off and you're using a riot mace, which comes from the Gorm, which on a critical wound forces the monster to do its basic action, you can actually effectively lock the antelope out of its AI cards. So this is one of the weakest basic actions in the game, because it so rarely targets. Onto our traits. So, Trample. When a monster collides with the survivor, they suffer damage equal to the monster's level to a random hit location. So this is on top of the normal collision rules of getting knocked down and possibly getting knocked back. Trample is definitely something that the Screaming Antelope's AI tries to make good use of. And it's also a little threatening when it starts running towards acanthus or towards the edge of the board, because it might run you down and just deal that damage. It's kind of just something you have to take at times, so be more willing to spend your survival on dodging and blocking with surges, because sometimes you might take extra damage through these tramples. It would absolutely suck to be like, okay, well, I'll take like 2 damage to the head and get knocked down, and then have the antelope trample you and stamp on your head, and that's it. So just keep this in the back of your mind, and when you've got a good amount of survival, maybe spend it a little bit more generously. Then we have Diabolical. Okay, so at the end of the monster's turn, you target a random survivor in the trample zone, which is indicated these corridors that extend infinitely out to the edges of the board in each of the cardinal directions, north, east, south and west. Then flow step, and then you full move through the target, move the monster through and past the survivor. If there is no target, full move forward. So the reason there'd be no target is because you might have managed to have all the survivors be in these grey areas through careful positioning, and the way the monster's behaviour has also managed to happen. But otherwise, it is going to pick a target. And the very key thing, and we're going to go over here to the board to note, is that once it's got a target, it is going to move towards them, even if it has to like weave around. It does not run in straight lines. I know that this card here depicts in straight lines, but that's purely the targeting. So in order to provide an example, let's put these survivors in like so, and we'll just put them like that. Okay. So, let's just get these blues out of the way. Right, from here, we would randomly draw, and any of Alistair, Lucy and Zachary could get targeted. Now, let's say this is the level 2 antelope, and so it can move 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it can reach here. So let's say it picks Zachary as the target. If Zachary dashes and tries to do this to be like clever, the antelope doesn't care. It's gonna move and just go straight through him, because it's going to move. It's not moving in a straight line. It's not full move in a straight line. It is just full moving. So it will run through him, and boom, he's getting knocked down and trampled. Now, Alistair, on the other hand, does have that little bit of extra benefit in that he is actually, if this has got 8 movement, he could dash and he could move like his full movement back, shall we say, like to here, and then it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and end up just short of him. So that's one of the things you want to be thinking about. And in fact, with Diabolical now, if we just demonstrate this, one of the really neat things you can do is if you have survivors who are kind of out of position and they're not really able to take part, it's actually good to get them in the corridor if you have dash, because they can make the antelope potentially go after them and not be in range, or actually be able to dash to get out of range. So that's something to think about. On the most part though, Diabolical is kind of just take your lumps. Somebody's going to get run over, take some damage, and then need to be encouraged back up, or spring up through whatever else. Hypermetabolism is our next trait. This one's actually very scary. So whenever the monster consumes, that's terrain or gear, the monster gains a +1 speed token. Yep. Okay, so the antelope consumes quite a fair bit. And this means that on the first turn, it might not have any targets and it might nip forward and eat some acanthus and get +1 speed straight away. That is really quite frightening. So it's something to bear in mind, that you probably want to scoop up as much acanthus as possible, and try and not let it consume your gear. You never want it consuming your gear anyway, but speed is quite a compounding effect for monsters. Speed is scarier than damage because we only have a finite number of dodges and blocks and deflects, and that more speed can help overcome that. Our last one is Legendary Horns. This gives +4 toughness tokens, so while the monster at level 3 technically only has 12, in actual fact has more than that, but toughness tokens can be removed through various different effects, so it's not, strictly speaking, 16 toughness all the time, always, but it is quite a lot. Another thing to see there is when survivors with less than 5 courage in their act adjacent to Screaming Antelope, they'll suffer 1 brain damage per monster level, so that is for the most part going to be 3 or maybe even 4 brain damage. So pack your courage. Most courageous survivors, your bravest boys and girls, want to go out to fight the Screaming Antelope. And then last time it's defeated, you gain the Legendary Hordes Strange Resource. That's a nice extra strange resource as like a permanent drop. So it is used to make the Lance of Longinus, which is the spear that pierced the side of Christ, or at least the same name. I don't personally like that spear. I don't think it's particularly great. Given that it is not better than the Lantern Glaive, and it's definitely not better than Zell's Glaive either. So on the whole, this for me is just an extra bone drop, but patterns may come out that use Legendary Horns. It's nice still to get a guaranteed drop here. Right, okay, so next up is going to be our AI. We're going to go through all of these. I've broken them apart as before with different categories, and also top to bottom is how dangerous I think they are. So we got attacks, intimidates, kind of generics, in this case it's just heals, and then moods and traits. Okay, so we're going to start with the attacks, and these are the ones that I consider to be soft. One of the first things to note, you'll see all of these have 1 speed. So the level 1 antelope is super vulnerable to shields. The knuckle shield and the spiked shield and the leather shield can all just, spiked buckler I think it is, and can all just shut the Screaming Antelope at level 1 down almost entirely for the most part and make it sort of harmless. Obviously, as the monster levels up, it gains more speed, so these starts become more threatening, but you do have better defenses to deal with that as well. So if you want an easier time in the early game, you could run the Gorm or Frog Dog, both of whom have a shield in their crafting options, and then the Screaming Antelopes, you know, 2, and especially the Spiked Shield, which is just fantastic. It's a really good weapon. You can, no sell and have a bunch of cards that almost do nothing against you. But let's walk through them individually. First of all, we have Stomp. You'll notice that this is closest knockdown survivor or furthest threat in field of view and range. Move and attack target. Always hits the body, dealing 2 damage, and then if it does damage, draw AI. Obviously, you should be dodging this or trying to prevent all of this damage as much as possible, but it does have the Destroyed Hoof persistent injury, which will cause it to get knocked down instead. Easy to forget persistent injuries. These days I put a coloured token on top of the AI deck, or just near it, and then on top of the matching persistent injury to remind me if I draw it that it is relevant and it's going to trigger. You may just have a better memory for those kind of things. Gore is our next one. So first we get this full move in the direction the monster is facing, then turn to face the closest survivor. That can at times just result in a trample, because someone may be in front of it, because it's just, they've gotten there and they've been a little unwise. So generally, if you know the antelope's goring, or it might gore and you're not sure, don't attack the monster from the front. But that is actually a good plan anyway, is to not be directly in front of the antelope. It picks a random survivor in range after it has done its full move. Moves and attacks, 1 speed, 2 plus accuracy, 1 damage, and it bashes after damage. Again, we can see it has a persistent injury. This is Ruined Horns. A random survivor gains +1 survival instead, which is absolutely fine. Our next two are both the same, which is bites. Bites are not as scary as the butcher bites. 1 speed, 2 plus accuracy, 2 damage, and after damage, dealing a bleed. Again, obviously, whether you want to, you dodging these or blocking these is a preference. They pick closest survivor in field of view, and I think you're already starting to see, unlike the white lion, this antelope, or the antelopes, are not as fixated on the survivor directly in front of them. They prefer knocked down targets, and they'll often just pick the closest target instead. So another reason to not bother having someone in front of the antelope as much, or in the front facing, because generally the closest target's more likely to get targeted. And don't leave survivors on the floor at the start of the monster's turn if you can avoid it, but that's just good practice against many of the monsters in the game. Finally, we have Slam. This is probably its weakest AI card, full stop. Targets closest knockdown survivor or furthest threat in field of view in range, so normally furthest threat in field of view in range. 1 speed, 2 plus accuracy, 1 damage. Again, with these furthest threat in field of view in range moves, one of the key things to think about is to try not have survivors in a corridor where the antelope would mow down one trying to get to the next. You can usually avoid that with good positioning by giving the antelope clear pathways to each of your survivors in between once you finished your turn, at the end of your turn. It's good positioning. On our medium threat levels, we've got a bunch. So, first up, Ram, furthest threat in range, furthest survivor, 1 speed, 2 plus accuracy, 1 damage, but it actually increases its damage by every space it has moved towards the target. This is one that you'd really want to dodge or block. If you know it's on the table and it's got it in its discard pile, so it's amongst its repertoire, maybe keep all the survivors a lot closer than you normally would, especially if you're low on survival, because you could put if you know this is coming, you can put like your best survivor for them to attack the one with the shield and evasion and everything as the furthest threat or furthest survivor, but generally I think it's better to just keep everyone close. Unfortunately, this card punishes you for being close. So all non-death survivors suffer 1 brain damage, and then all survivors in the zone of death, if they're knocked down, suffer 1 damage per monster level to every hit location. And if they are standing, they suffer 1 damage per monster level to 1 location bash and knockback 7. Obviously, that flow step it's encourage time. If anyone is still foolishly on their backs and in the zone of death when this happens, get them on their feet, because that stamping is really, really nasty. Even at level 1, that's 5 points of damage. Level 2, 10. Level 3, 15. And level 4 is 20 points. So use that flow step to stand up. And obviously, be content with the 1 damage per monster level to 1 location bash and knockback 7. It's also... This starts to bring to an interesting point where the antelope is less predictable than the white lion in many ways. It does feel quite sort of erratic at times, and so AI scouting really does pay out very well against the antelope, perhaps even more so than the white lion. So that's just something you may want to bear in mind, especially if you know Lone Rampage is in the monsters deck, because while this isn't super bad, it is still quite disruptive. Then we have Rundown, full move in the direction the monster's facing. So again, this is don't stand in front. You get a flow step. It picks the closest knockdown survivor in range 12, or closest survivor in range 12, and it gets to move twice and attack targets. So it does range 12 because the level 1 can reach range 12. And again, punishment for being knocked down. This goes from a 1 2+1 to a 4 2+1. 4 2+1's like terrifying, but if it has a crushed spine, it'll just get knocked down instead. Next to same card, twice back kick. This is a blind spot in range, closest threat in range. It'll move and turn, so you're in the blind spot, and it kicks you. 1 speed, 3+ accuracy, 3 damage. Destroyed hoof, so if it has that, then it'll just get knocked down instead. So we're seeing there's a lot of knockdown and a lot of benefits for persistent injuries, meaning critical wounds are fantastic against the Screaming Antelope, but they kind of are anyway. For the most part, don't have soft targets in the blind spot. I genuinely don't like fighting the Screaming Antelope from the blind spot unless I have to. I will typically attack from either the corners with a reach weapon, a long distance with a range weapon, or from the flanks is my preferred fighting spots. Last of all, we have Bolt, closest knockdown survivor or furthest threat in range. Moves and attacks, 1, 2+1, and then it'll full move in a straight line away from all survivors. The main thing with this is, I don't think it's like super dangerous. I almost put this in the top pile, but that repositioning can be annoying and at times can result it then in grazing, and especially at high levels, hypermetabolism starts to kick in then. So I have a preference for this. Like I think this is just a bit more dangerous than the ones up there situationally, so that's why it's neutral. Finally, we have all of these, so we'll get to Crush and Devour last. We've got Great Kick, which is another back kick, but at 4 speed, 2+ accuracy, and 2 damage. Random survivor in blind spot, furthest threat in range, in field of view and range. Destroyed hoof causes a knockdown again. Not a lot to say beyond this one's just super painful. It really sucks to have this one be on the level 1 in particular. Quite brutal, so again you might want to be AI scouting while attacking it so you can remove the problematic AIs, the A cards with wounds. Ravenous is also terrifying. Closest survivor, consumable gear in range, closest survivor in field of view. It'll move, it'll attack, 1 speed, 2+ accuracy, 2 damage, and after damage, if it successfully damages then, it will consume 1 gear in your gear grid, so you have to choose an archive a gear card. It doesn't matter if that gear is consumable or not, because it will just eat something. As a consequence, stone noses are nice to have, because that is a very cheap piece of gear that has done everything it needs to by the time it could get eaten. So that's my usual recommendation, at least early on, is to have stone noses in everyone's gear grid, and after that, well, don't let it do this, just beat it up or prevent it from damaging you in the first place. Having gear get archived is very costly, and maybe you don't want to let the antelope do it, especially with hypermetabolism on the table as well. Finally, our legendary. So this is one of the 2 legendaries that I think it's 2. Anyway, it's one of the legendary cards. It'll pick closest knockdown survivor or furthest threat in field of view in range. 1 speed, 2+ accuracy, 3 damage, and after damage it will just hit you with disemboweled. That sucks. Disemboweled is pretty nasty. Your movement is reduced to 1 until Showdown ends. Gain 1 bleeding token, skip next hand. If you suffer disemboweled in Showdown, at least one of the survivors must live to the end of the Showdown to carry you back to settlement. Otherwise, at the end of Showdown, you're lost, dead. Disemboweled is really dangerous. You don't want to be suffering that at all. So generally the best play against this card is to remove it as a wound before the antelope draws it. Otherwise, make sure your furthest threat in field of view in range is your hardest target. If you're concerned about skewer, it's a little tough, it's a little random, but fortunately it's just 1 speed. Finally, we have Crush and Devour, which is a terrifying card, but also immensely fun. It'll pick closest threat in field of view in range, or closest survivor in range. 2 speed, 2 plus accuracy, and then before it deals any damage, it will instead inflict the gobbled up survivor status card right here. So when you gain this, you remove your survivor from the board and place them on this card, then you crush and devour, and at the start of your act, you crush and devour masticated. If the monster suffers 2 wounds in a single round, you crush and devour regurgitate. This is just one of those really cool moments where the first time it happens, suddenly you're like, oh, wait a minute, the game can do this? That's a really cool use of extra mechanics, and there's a number of cards that make use of this, taking your survivor and sticking them on the card. But this is generally the first time most people will encounter it, which is very cool. I think this is such a brilliant piece of design, and also the card art is just perfect, no notes. But let's get over to the actual event so we can walk through it. Okay, here we are. So first of all, this artwork, this is more like the model version of the antelope, although this is a considerably bigger creature. I wish the antelope was this size. It's starting to look a little small compared to some of the size of some of the models that are coming out. It's also one of the most anime pieces of artwork in the entire entire game. Like, it's super anime. It's also interesting, this we're seeing here, this viscera, it might be the poor survivor who's been masticated, but it also equally might be parts of the antelope itself, because it seems like there's a number of internal organs inside this belly mouth, as we will see as we go through it. Okay, so crush and devour. The survivor disappears, shrieking into the Screaming Antelope's giant undermaw. You are masticated. Masticating is rolling 1d10. On a 1 or a 2, you are swallowed whole, you are dead. The monster happily digests you, heals 1 wound, and gains +1 speed token. Now that is why this card is super scary. Survival of the fittest is a heck of a thing, giving you a reroll, so, you know, another little, hey, this thing's really good. On a 3 or 4, you struggle frantically, stuck in a thick, sticky mucus. Your leg slips between the monster's teeth, and you suffer the dismembered leg, severe leg injury. That's terrible. And the monster heals 1 wound. On a 5 or 6, the monster's mouth hangs slack, and fresh air brushes your face. You try to wriggle free with your arm, reaching recklessly past the teeth. You suffer the dismembered severe arm injury, and the monster heals 1 wound. And then finally, on a 7, 8, 9 or 10, with a burst of ferocity, you fight back. You roll 1d10 on the table below. On a 1 to 3, your efforts are useless. You suffer 1 brain damage per monster level. On a 4 to 7, you fight but are chewed helplessly, suffering 1 damage to each hit location. On an 8 plus, you are suddenly bitten by a pulsing organ. You tear it free. The monster suffers 1 wound and you gain the second heart strange resource and regurgitate. You suffer 1 damage to the arms location. You generally don't want to be masticated. The less time you spend with this table, the better. Sure, the second heart strange resource, this is the only way you're going to get it, but this is such a dangerous table that you don't ever really want to be trying to engineer this. Instead, if somebody gets masticated and crushed and devoured and they're on that card, everyone else needs to go full ham and hit the monster as hard as possible to score those wounds to get it to regurgitate. Which is place gobbled up survivors in a free space adjacent to the monster, archive gobbled up, and roll on the table below for each survivor who's been gobbled up. On 1 to 3, you wonder if you are dead, you are knocked down and suffer 1 brain damage. On a 4 to 7, covered in vomit but alive, you are knocked down and gain 1 insanity. On an 8 or 9, the experience gives you a new perspective, gain +1 understanding. And on a 10 plus, you vindictively attack on your way out, gain the flat tooth Screaming Antelope resource, and the Screaming Antelope suffers 1 wound. That is, I believe, the large flat tooth is the full name of that resource. Yep, the large flat tooth. They just missed 1 word out. That's fine. These things happen. So yeah, ultimately, if you get crushed and devoured, this needs to happen as fast as possible, because getting masticated is absolutely horrendous. Right. Onto our intimidates. These are just 1 intimidates, the same card twice. It's not too bad actually. So it picks a random survivor in range. The Screaming Antelope begins to stomp and snort excitedly. A gurgled moan sounds from its undermouth. It turns to face the target. Roll 1d10 on a 4+. They suffer 1 brain damage per monster level and they're knocked down. In addition, if they're insane, they suffer knockback 5. This is a very soft Intimidate, very, very soft. Considering how screamy the antelope is, it's in the name, it's interesting that this is the only Intimidate it has. The vast majority of its brain damage tends to be located in its hit locations. We have Showdown here. So there's 2 of these. There's a basic action, so it's going to turn up quite often. First of all, if there's no Acanthus plants on the Showdown board, you discard Showdown and perform basic action. That means if there's no knockdown survivor, the antelope's just going to run forwards. Otherwise, full move the Screaming Antelope to the closest Acanthus monster. If it ends its movement on or adjacent to an Acanthus plant, it consumes it. Remember, that's a consume, hypermetabolism. Archive the terrain and perform heal 1d5, which moves 1d5 cards from the wound stack to the bottom of the AI deck without being looked at, and then you place Showdown on top of the monster AI deck instead of discarding it. It has 2 of these. So, if you're just trying to kill the antelope legitimately, this is something you want to get rid of as quickly as possible. So one of the ways you can avoid it is by clearing up all the Acanthus plants as quickly as you can, spending your first couple of turns grabbing all the Acanthus until it's off the board, so chow downs essentially just become basic actions. That's a perfectly valid way to play. Alternatively, if you plan to what we call crit farm, chow down is a key element of that. So if we just take this and put it over here for now. So say the antelope, let's grab this stack to demonstrate here. We won't need it again. So the antelope does its chow down. It runs up to this piece of Acanthus, and eats it and heals its 1d5. So you'll be putting those, let's just grab, like, for the sake of this card here and this card here, and they'll be going into the bottom of the deck, and then this will be going on top. So essentially, if you then just leave this on top, it'll have eaten this Acanthus, and then it'll eat this Acanthus, and then it'll eat this one, and it'll just keep going until it's eaten all the Acanthus on the board. The trick here is you can let it do that, and you can let it fully heal with the intention of re-wounding it. And as we go for the hit locations, you will see there's a lot of critical wounds. Additionally, this isn't a duration, so you can still manipulate the AI deck, because a duration would not let you change things. But if this was on top and then you used the rawhide headband, and you saw stomp and snort beneath, you could do this. And you can let it stomp and snort, and then that goes into the discard pile, or perhaps even gets removed as a wound. You put it on top and wound it away, and then the monster chows down and heals. So basically, with careful juggling of the chow downs and a lot of patience, especially forcing the chow downs to be at the bottom of the AI deck, because you can manipulate them all the way down to the very bottom of the deck, so everything's in the wound stack before it starts chow downing. It can fully heal up, and then if you've got a ton of deadly and extra luck, you can just rip this thing to pieces and make a bunch more resources. And as you may have noticed, the antelope has a lot of these persistent injury cards that effectively mean these cards are blank and they don't do anything. So that is absolutely a valid strategy. You can also do this with the White Lion because of how lick wounds works. White Lion only has 1 lick wounds, and it will discard it once it's fully wounded, which means if you're really, really super patient, you can do the same thing with the White Lion, where you beat it up repeatedly and then let it lick all its wounds up and then do it again over and over. That means, hypothetically, and I have done it in practical terms, you can get every single resource out of the White Lion's deck and out of the Screaming Antelope's deck. I don't like doing it, but you know, if you were looking to do it once in a campaign, you could set yourself up really nicely and never have to do it again. Ultimately, I do think that this should be a duration. But this is a cooperative game. You don't have to exploit AI if you don't want to. You can just play legit and natural and not spend all day, hours and hours, farming the same antelope for every single piece of its body. Right, over here we've got our moods and traits. We have basically 1, 1 and 1. Buck. Very simple mood. You can avoid this just by not being in the blind spot. Effectively, it's the antelope wounding itself by 1. I don't see much need to fight the antelope in the blind spot, so this is absolutely fine. Very happy to see it. Infested, quite a bit scarier. +1 toughness token. +1 toughness is a lot. That can really affect your breakpoints on your ability to score wounds. Additionally, 50% chance of suffering 1 brain damage per monster level for every survivor when it's drawn. It draws an AI, so it replaces itself, although it does remove itself from the deck, so again, it is a permanent quote-unquote wound. When the survivor ends their act adjacent monster on a 1 or 2, they're infested with ticks and gain a -1 strength token. You're just going to have to suck this up if that's the situation. Just live with it. Hopefully you're dealing damage through luck and critical wounds, but sometimes that's not the case. There isn't much to do beyond not letting this resolve in the first place and killing the monster as fast as possible once it is in play. Last of all, we have in heat. It's worth noting, as I kind of fumbled through before, there are, while there are 3 legendary cards, there are only ever going to be 2 in the deck at the moment. That's these 2. So these are always going to be turning up. That's because the 3rd legendary card, Legendary Horns, is always put into play against the monster that'll have it. So you know these are always going to be in the level 3 deck. In heat is very scary. +1 damage token, draws an AI card, so it does something on the turn this has happened. It gets extra brain damage when it starts grazing, and it will even knock down non-deaf insane survivors. This is both of these you want to remove, like all legendaries if you can, but if I had to pick one, I'd want to get rid of this one over this one every time. This is brutal a lot of the time. Okay, hit locations. Woo, we got hit locations, we got resources, and then we're done pretty much. So on the hit locations, same kind of layout thing. I have categorized them together. We've got like statics, so these either have no text, or they have just a fixed thing. We have failures, wounds, so anyway, and then we got the trap. So to start with, we have all of these. They're identical unless you're critically wounding. As you can see, 3 of them do some of the persistent injuries. These are these affect some AI cards. This is one you're going to need to set yourself a reminder for, as it has a chance of confusing itself and full moving forward. Don't be in front of the antelope, as is the story. Like the general term, don't stand in front of the antelope, don't stand in front of the white lion, or directly in front. This crushed knee, chance of it getting knocked down when moving, and then we've got the 1 in 10 chance of the instant kill, and this will just automatically knock the monster down, cancelling any reactions and scoring hits on the 3+. Remember about Indomitable with the level 3. Main thing, you're more likely to be bashing this monster with a club. The bone club is great, but as I said before, there's actually very good shields in the Gorm and Frog Dog, so it is worth putting a lucky charm on a club user or a shield user, because this is a number of locations. At 5, that's quite a few. Here, just the furry tail, no special rules, but a Screaming Antelope resource and -1 accuracy. That's +1 evasion for everyone, so that's great to crit. And then we have the Super Dents and First Strike. So the Super Dents, very standard, critical wounded for 1 Screaming Antelope resource. This is the first time you'll encounter a Super Dents from Quarry Monsters in your first time playing, so just bear in mind. It does have the ability to break your weapons. It actually has a number of ways it messes with weapons, as we'll see in a moment. Generates resource. And then Restless Eye. this is first strike, so you have to pick this first. If you're insane, it just cancels your attack. Otherwise, you suffer 1 brain damage. So we're seeing a 1 or 2 insanity is a nice number to be at. However, if you critically wound this, then it gets -1 evasion, meaning everyone else gets +1 accuracy against it, and it gets archived, so you don't have to deal with it for the rest of the showdown. Failures. Okay, so we have just the 1, I believe. Let's just check. Yeah, just the 1. If you fail, then your weapon gets stuck and then you stumble and knock back 5. Not a big deal. On a crit, +1 Screaming Antelope resource, and this persistent injury, which ruined horns, which affects some AI cards. We've already seen that. Oops. And then we got over here 2 of these. So these are both essentially making it harder for you to attack until you deal with something. So this one, if attacking with a melee weapon, it's knocked out of reach by the Screaming Antelope's thrashing hooves. You must spend your bolt, your activation, to retrieve your lost weapon before it can be used again. But if you fight with fist and tooth, you suffer the dislocated shoulder, severe arm injury. Don't punch the Screaming Antelope if it has Restless Hoof in its deck. You don't really want to punch the hoof and suffer a dislocated shoulder. Of course, if it's in the discard pile or if it's been removed as the persistent injury, get fisting. Go for it. I can't help but wonder if in the future this might get replaced with Disarm, because Disarm came in the Gambler's Chest, which is effectively doing what this does, but more thematically and mechanically stronger. Restless Tiny Hands over here. Grasping tiny hands make rude gestures at you. Startled, you gain +1 insanity, you lose your composure, and you must spend a bolt to regain your senses before you can attack again. Worth putting a little reminder on that survivor, so you know they have to do this until otherwise. And down here, just a classic. You've seen a lot of these generating Screaming Antelope resources. This ties into the idea of crit farming. Finally, at the bottom, do we have just the one? Yes, the palette. Okay, so this isn't so bad if you've got survival, but if you don't, this can be horrendous. 3 damage to the arm location, and you can't block this, you can't dodge this. You're attacking. You got to suck this up. Effectively, you should spend survival every time you have it, unless you've got a bonkers amount of arm protection. The critical wound is big. But it won't feel like it's doing much when you're fighting the level 1, because -1 speed token against the level 1, a lot of the time it's 1 speed anyway, so this becomes stronger against level 2 and level 3. Alright, and then we've got our wound reactions. We've got 2 up here, which I consider beneficial. Giant Tongue, easy to wound. 50% chance in your wound roll of 1 brain damage or 1 insanity. Critical, standard, gain 1 Screaming Antelope resource. Restless Inner Thigh is a -1 movement token on a wound, which is bonkers good. And then the critical wound, whenever the Screaming Antelope moves, it suffers an additional wound, but that is discarded at the end of the next round. That degenerating wound can result in way more wounds than you would expect, because you may have noticed sometimes the antelope double moves in a turn. Perhaps even more than that, especially with reactions and similar. So that can be a lot of damage. It's probably worth, if you're looking to close out a fight, in really hammering an antelope that has a degenerating wound to try and trigger multiple movements, if you want to kill the antelope fast. Restless Chest, here we are. Speak of the Devil, move straight, turn to face the attacker and move full forward in a straight line. So one of the things to note about monsters like this is one of your best spots to attack from is to have a reach weapon and attack from the corners, because in this situation then, say if Urza attacked, it has to turn to face, so it can't actually diagonally face her, but so you pick one of these 2 directions for it to face and then have it move straight forward in that straight line. So reach weapons and ranged weapons are really, really, really good against the antelope, way better than they are against other monsters, and they're very strong as it is. Critical, again, this is one of those ones that gets better against high level monsters. Screaming Antelope having -1 damage token is more impactful with the level 1. because there are a bunch of 2 and 3 damage hits, but it becomes strongest when you are against higher levels because of the overall raising across the board of all damage. Restless shoulder. Restless shoulder. This has the antelope turn to face you and then jump backwards. It'll cancel all hits out of range, so it's moving one space. Just remember that it can cause collision and that will cause trample. So good, smart positioning. Again, fighting the monster on corners or making sure that somebody isn't on the opposite side of the monster when you're attacking it can reduce the chances of this triggering, but it is only one card in the deck. Then we have the Restless Shank. Roll 1d10 for each survivor currently in the monster's blind spot. On a 3+, they get brutally back kicked. This is for 3 damage to random hit location and knock back 5. Yeah, again, don't be in the blind spot when fighting this. The Screaming Antelope is a general good sort of thing. Beyond the flanks, beyond the corners. Our crit has this little bonus that if you're insane, you can spend 5 survival to treasure this moment forever and gain a permanent +1 movement. That's really good. If the monster's close to dying and you have this 5 survival, it is actually worth 5 survival. So as long as you could spend all of that and not be concerned about dying and losing the showdown or dying, it is worth the spend. It's really, really good. Okay, then we got our 4 reflexes. Giant Mouth. Reflex. On 1 or 2, it consumes your weapon. If you're attacking with fist and tooth, you'll suffer the dismembered severe arm injury. Remember I said don't punch the antelope. This is another time you shouldn't punch the antelope, but this can be removed as a permanent injury, in which case fisting is back on the menu. Not a lot you can do except attack with ranged weapons if you want to avoid this happening. It's just one of those things. Restless Rump, turn face away with the attacker and full move forward in a straight line. Cancel all hits now out of range. Remember what I said about don't have survivors on the opposite side when you're attacking. Here's more of that. Crits, again, resources, lots of resource crits. Restless Frank, it turns to face the attacker. Not a big deal this, but it is worth noting that it can have an impact on other things where the antelope might next be running forward or it might be bouncing backwards into a survivor. Pay attention to that and think about when you want to roll to try and wound this hit location. And finally we have the Furious Spasm. It basic actions every single survivor in the zone of death. You'll notice the corners are not present in this. So again, attacking from the corners, really good. Attacking at distance, really good. But this is only one card, and it's worth noting that because it's already targeting, it will be doing all of this. But this isn't a super dangerous attack, so I'm not massively scared of Ferocious Spasm. This isn't as bad as when the Butcher does it, but it can catch you off guard if you're not prepared. Finally, we have the Trap. The Screaming Antelope panics, its undermouth unleashing an inhuman wail. It bucks wildly, leaps in the air. The attacker, and only the attacker, is doomed. All survivors adjacent to the monster suffer 2 brain damage per monster level, knockback 5 and a knockdown, and then the monster lands on its belly and begins to slide on its teeth, which always puts my teeth slightly on edge when describing. It explains why there's a lot of rotting teeth lying around the place when you're hunting antelopes, because if they're sliding around on their belly, they are definitely knocking some of these out, which suggests that as a part of their hypermetabolism, they are constantly regrowing teeth whenever they lose them. Maybe they have multiple layers inside like a shark, who knows. So the monster lands on its belly and begins to slide in its teeth, turn the monster directly away from the attacker and full move in a straight line. On a collision, non-death survivors gain 1 random disorder in addition to normal collision rules. Remember before, as I said, and I'm just going to repeat it one last time, don't have survivors on the opposite side of the antelope when you're attacking them. When you're attacking it. Don't do it. If you can avoid it at all, they will quite often pay the price. So that's all of it. There's a huge amount of locations where you can suffer critical wounds. I did write it down and I've forgotten, generate resources of critical wounds and critical wounds. Look, 5 there, let's see, that's 6, 7, 8, I think actually every single hit location apart from one can be critically wounded. Yeah, I think that is the case. Let's just double check as we're here. Oops, excuse me. Yep, ferocious spasm. Yeah, just ferocious spasm. So there is a ton of opportunities to generate resources. And even though the antelope has more bones than other stuff, it is still absolutely worth it because every resource you generate during the showdown gives you an increased chance of getting to the really good stuff. So, speaking of which, let's close this out with a little look at the resource deck itself. And I noticed I need to go grab the legendary big old horns. There we are, much better. Okay, so these are listed from top left, which is the highest number in the deck, to least in the bottom right. And then these are level 3 gains. So we have 4 shank bones, 1 for each leg, 4 pelts, and then it should be 2 and 2 and then 1 of each of these. So this is not a big deck. That's another reason why crit farming it can be relatively quick, because there's not a massive amount of resources to get. The best of these are the pelt if you're making the armor set, and the spiral horn for the armor set, the brain to make brain mint, and the bladder is my all-time personal favourite resource in the entire game because it smells like teen spirit, but more importantly it's used to make blood paint, which is one of my favourite items because it allows you to play dual weapon wielding without having to be ambidextrous or run paired weapons, so you can play sword and board, and I love it. I really love it. Stampede Glaive is amazing. I've talked about that in the review of Zell. It's still as great as ever. I really like it. As I said, this is bone scrap. I actually use them as bone or scrap more than I use them as the legendary horns these days, but they are helpful with patterns. So that's it. If you get Spiral Horn, you should definitely think about making the armor set. You should always turn this into Brain Mint. I would have like 2 or 3 Brain Mints without hesitation. I'd have 2 or 3 bladders as well for blood paint without hesitation. In regards to the weapons, the Beast Knuckle is not bad as katars go. It's not really a strict upgrade over the Lion Beast Katar, so in the core game it tends to not be something you really worry about making too often unless you missed out on making the Lion Beast Katar. But when you've got other expansions in the game, especially ones with mid and late game Katars, this can be a nice place to start. It is a good weapon. It's just Katars are in an odd spot when you're playing with the base core game People of the Lantern experience only. Otherwise, last thing to sort of note is, as you can see, we don't have a massive amount of hide in here. We literally have just these 3 pieces of pelt. That's part of the reason. Another reason why Beast Knuckle's hard to make, because it uses a flat tooth and a pelt. These beast steaks, their use is in cooking, otherwise they're just generic organs. And the muscly gums, I kind of remember if they are used for anything particular, but I always use them as a generic resource. So, there we are. That's it. Oh, camera having a little bit of a time. Let's go. So, this is the Screaming Antelope. That's pretty much everything I have to say about it. I really like and appreciate this monster a great deal. It is a loot pinata. I can't really ignore that, but Kingdom Death has become such a customizable sandboxy game that is really good to have your choice on monsters to tailor to your experience, and the Screaming Antelope providing that acanthus, providing plenty of opportunities for resource drops that can help newer players. And also, I'll be honest, I still really like having this in because I absolutely adore the Antelope Knowledge herb grinder, I think it's called. So that's really delightful and strong, and I like having it. So the Antelope is something that's constantly coming back to my table between blood paint and acanthus, and just my love of the armor set and my love of spears in general. Even though it does have a few specific weaknesses. Obviously, if you want to take the strongest line possible, you'll want to pack luck, lots of deadly stuff, lots of extra luck, run shields, and have good deep pools of survival, and ranged weapons, reach and ranged weapons. Beyond that, it isn't the softest of the Node 2 monsters. I'd say it's the second softest, maybe. No, it's third softest, actually. I definitely think the Flower Knight, at least at level 1, and the Smog Singers are both softer than the Screaming Antelope. But ultimately, I still kind of love this goofy little fella. I really hope it gets a updated, revised design, because the Screaming God design is amazing. But even if it doesn't, this is still... It's my second favourite of the Node 2 monsters. And I think this is my favourite of the core game Quarry monsters for sure. So yeah, that is it. That's the Screaming Antelope. That closes this chapter. Next time, which should come soonish, will be Spidicules. And I'm very, very excited about that one, because that is a doozy of a monster. And that's it. Pens down, and I'll see you next time.